Hi, I'm Mary.
And I'm Katie, and this is The Housewife Did It.
True Crime Edition, Part 4 of the West Memphis 3. Today we are getting into where the three are now and additional theories because if it wasn't obvious, we don't think they did it. So as you're listening, if you feel particularly drawn to a theory, agreement or disagreement, please share the episode with your friends and start a
Write about
discussion.
it.
Yeah. Start a discussion and then make sure that they like, subscribe, and review us. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and then let us know your thoughts, your theories.
Yeah, because this is one that I really don't have a super solid theory on. I've always felt very compelled by the Bojangles man. But it seems like I am in the minority on that.
He might be. He's suspicious. He got somebody bloody.
They were like laughing in the Paradise Lost. They brought it up, the Bojangles man. They like interviewed the manager on the stand and stuff at Damien's trial, and the prosecution was laughing the whole time. And they were like, they really did themselves in bringing up the Bojangles man. I was like, no, that's weird as shit.
Yeah. Same content warning as the others. I'm assuming if you made it here, you've heard the others.
Yeah, if you haven't,
just pick up,
right, you'll need to back it up.
Yeah. This one might have a good bit of repeating as I try to go through things that make different theories seem more likely. So bear with us on that. Some stuff you've already heard, but some new stuff and things that hopefully are more detailed. So, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So after years on trial and then in prison, specifically on death row for Damien, for the murders of 3 8-year-old boys, Jason, Jessie, and Damien had not given up. Not only were they still working to be free and to clear their own names, but they were actively involved in trying to solve the case. In 2011, they would have the opportunity to be free, but not to officially clear their names. Between 1996 and 2011, the 3 convicted men's defense teams had made countless efforts to appeal their convictions, show new evidence, or get an all-new trial. All were brought before the same judge from their original trials, and all were denied. So Mary gave us a pretty good recap of those. They started right away. They did not stop. So, last week, Mary also mentioned the new DNA evidence that was found in 2007, but the defense was having trouble convincing the court to hear this evidence. So, back in time a little bit. In 2001, Arkansas passed a new statute that grants post-conviction access to DNA testing and possibly a new trial to those who proclaim their innocence. It reads, quote, "A person convicted of a crime may commence a proceeding to secure relief or grant a new trial if the person claims that 1. Scientific evidence not available at trial establishes the petitioner's actual innocence, or 2. The scientific predicate for the claim could not have been previously discovered through the exercise of due diligence, and the facts underlying the claim would be sufficient to establish by clear and convincing evidence that no reasonable fact finder would find the petitioner guilty." It's a lot of words. End quote. I always end the quote after I've ad-libbed something. In the next section, it specifies, quote, "A person may make a motion for the performance of fingerprinting, forensic DNA testing, or other tests which may become available through advances in technology to demonstrate a person's innocence if A, testing is to be performed on evidence secured in relation to the trial which resulted in conviction." It also states that the court should prioritize cases that include, quote, "the opportunity for conclusive or near conclusive proof that a person is actually innocent and a lengthy..." Oh, okay, I have to read that again. I lost myself. It also states that the court should prioritize those cases that include the opportunity for conclusive or near conclusive proof that a person is actually innocent and a lengthy sentence or a death sentence. In other words, this right here.
Mm-hmm.
Although this may seem pretty straightforward, it apparently was not. The Attorney General argues that this was not relevant to the case of the West Memphis Three because the DNA evidence that would be available to test was not presented in their first trial. Because why would you present a hair that you can't connect to anybody? But I guess he's hung up on where it says like
like I think it's like implies that if they could have brought it up and they chose not to, like that's on them and their defense team.
Sure,
but like you're saying, like what they just said, like there's a hair, we have no idea who it belongs to.
Yeah, it says, and testing is to be performed on evidence that is secured in relation to the trial which resulted in conviction. So like this hair is obviously related to that trial.
Right.
It just like wasn't in the trial because who's going to bring forth a hair and be like, now, can y'all decipher the color of this? Because otherwise we have no information on this hair.
Right. Color, length.
He said, quote, such a request for relief from a criminal judgment without a claim of error in the underlying proceedings is a request for clemency. We cannot delegate this power to the courts without infringing on the governor's powers, end quote. Go away. The court also argued that a 2005 amendment, which said that relief could be denied if the results were inconclusive, meant that if the results were inconclusive as to the claim of innocence.
That's never been said ever, actually. It's not a thing.
Someone who was involved in writing this piece of legislation was able to argue on behalf of the defense in 2010 that the intent was to allow new trials or relief in the case of new DNA evidence. They stated that the DNA was not required to conclusively prove innocence to even be allowed into a hearing or to be retested. The DNA results in this case were scientifically conclusive, meaning that results were gained.
Right.
So
saying it was inconclusive is just a straight up lie.
You just added like 7 words to that sentence and said, well, that's what they meant.
That's crazy.
Wait, where are my readers?
Damien asked me the other day when we were watching Paradise Lost, he was like, well, like, what did Bill Clinton think of all this? Because he was the governor at the time. I said, no, Bill Clinton was the president at the time.
Yeah, he was busy.
Yeah, he was not thinking about this.
I mean, he should have been.
Yeah.
After this argument, along with the evidence of jury misconduct by Kent Arnold, the Arkansas Supreme Court did order an evidentiary hearing where they would consider the DNA evidence, but also any other exculpatory evidence that was not presented in the first trials. Woo. However, in 2011, the state offered the men a deal to avoid starting a new trial and presenting any new evidence. They offered them an Alford plea, which is summed up in this statement made by one of those 3 men. Quote, I am innocent of these charges, but based on advice from my counsel, I am entering an Alford guilty plea. I believe this is in my best interest, end quote. And that is what every single one of them had to say to leave prison. Jason Baldwin says he really did not want to accept this deal and be forced to plead guilty when he is innocent. But he says he ultimately did it for Damien because, quote, they're trying to kill Damien. The prosecution attorney said in a press conference that the judge would have likely granted an all-new trial from the evidentiary hearing, and it is very likely that the 3 men would have been acquitted. How embarrassing to say that out loud, that they just did you a favor. And I've always felt this way about Alford pleas. Like, I understand that, like, you don't want to, like, have a guilty verdict on you. I get that. But to me, everyone in the world knows what an Alford plea means. It doesn't. Yeah. They say it means I'm innocent, but I know they have enough on me to convict me. I think it doesn't.
Right.
I think it means
Well, and like
they don't have enough. Like, they are
right.
scared. I'm
They
doing them
like
a
they wouldn't
favor.
have offered you this if they had what they say they have. And like I think in this case especially to say like we have enough like that they're saying I understand they have enough to think I'm guilty. That's a
Mhm.
fucking lie. Like they
Yeah.
don't. They have
Yeah.
nothing. And
Yeah.
like I was watching Jason made a video on Instagram about he said like it was like their release anniversary.
Mm.
And he was like, now he's like, I really did not want to do this.
Mhm.
Um, but he's like, I've like now that I've been out, like I've thought about it a lot and like I really am just so grateful that I get to like live a
Yeah.
normal life every day now. And like he's like, I understand why I had to do it. And like I do want to eventually like clear my name and I want to like help Stevie and Michael and Chris's families like find out who did this and what happened to them. But like I understand now like why I had to do the Alfred plea even though I didn't want to.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
like
I
still
think it's like
sucks.
very much, yeah, and it's very much like I'm not gonna risk going back to prison for 20 more
Right.
years or getting the electric chair, and you're not gonna risk me getting acquitted. So, like,
Right.
fine, this works for both of us, whatever. And I just feel like no one looks at someone with an Alfred plea and thinks like they're guilty.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they should rest assured in that way, but
Yeah.
obviously it still sucks. The prosecutor added, quote, by having them enter a guilty plea, it stops them from suing the state for millions of dollars, end quote. Nice. They were able to go home on August 19th, 2011. In 2012, Damien published a book. He not his first one. He's been published with books out there.
Okay.
But he published his book Life After Death that included lots of things that he had written while in prison. In it, he talks about his childhood, his criminal and mental health history, the trials, and his life in prison. And I just wanted to read some of it because I loved it. He said as he writes that he just doesn't want to be seen as an oddity, a freak, or a curiosity. Fair. He described his stepdad as, quote, one of the most hateful people I know, yet always in church. He says, now I know this is nothing unusual, that it's more the rule than the exception. About his mom, he said she's good at rearranging the past to fit whatever view she currently wishes to promote. And then a bit longer, but I want to read it to you. He said about his dad, quote, every word he spoke changed the way I saw him. In that moment, I saw my father, not as a man, but as a boy. He was a child who never lived up to a single responsibility in his life, and he had failed me in every way conceivable. He had abandoned me, left me to live in poverty and squalor with a hateful religious zealot of a stepfather and a mother who wouldn't raise a hand to protect us from his tyranny. I saw him as weak, knowing he wouldn't survive the despair of a life like the one he had left me to. I didn't want to hear anything else from him. With absolute contempt, I spat the words, I'd eat you alive. During my trial, the prosecutor tried to say that I meant those words literally, that I was a cannibal, lacking nothing but a bone to put through my nose. Of course, I meant nothing of the sort. What I meant was that I realized I was stronger than my father, that I had survived a life that he had crumbled beneath the weight of, that he had abandoned years earlier. I had survived without him. End quote.
So good.
Damien's too fucking smart for these people. He was like,
Mm-hmm.
I said that it was metaphorical. And they're
I'm
like,
like
no, he's going to eat him alive. He's like, okay.
dumb. I like the part where he says, like talks about like how little hate mail he gets, but that when he does, he's like, nothing is spelled right. It's incoherent. Like they don't know what they're talking about. Like they get
Mm-hmm.
everything wrong about the case. He's like, people who are hateful, like, don't take any time to like care
Mm-hmm.
to learn things or
Yeah.
like gain understanding. And he said he thinks the reason he doesn't get more hate mail is because people who are hateful don't want to write um in general. But
He's like,
like
here's what I can tell you about West Memphis.
yeah, and but like listening to him like talk about his like parents and his upbringing and like it just it makes like so much sense that he was who he was as a teenager, like the angsty whatever that we've talked about, but also like what he's like become as an adult is like so much more impressive
Mm-hmm.
because of like there was not a single moment of his life, childhood, teenage years, early adulthood, that was easy.
Yeah. He did say about his stepfather, like, the one thing he would give him is that, like, he always let him, like,
Yes.
wear what he wanted and, like,
Yeah.
listen to what he wanted, and he told his mom, like, he's just trying to find himself.
Yeah.
And so, and I will say his stepdad did adopt him, and he has
Yeah.
his last name, but he refers to him as his stepdad, so I will do that
Yeah.
too.
And he also said in the book that the reason that he allowed his stepdad to adopt him was so that his father would not have to pay child support.
Yeah, so it was like an arrangement more
Right.
than like this is my new dad.
He
While
refused to
this,
call him dad.
yeah, while the state could maintain that the case was solved and would not need to investigate any further, there were still families, advocates, and 3 men who had spent 18 years in prison who wanted to solve this case. Not Gary Gitchell, but Damien
Mm.
Echols does.
He said, "I'm done."
I'm retired. I've done my good deed. Gotten an emo kid off the streets. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we're gonna start with Mr. Bojangles. Woo, woo,
Who
woo.
did it?
Which is not a great sign for what I find like how high on the totem pole he is as a suspect. Officer Meeks received a call around 8:40 p.m.
In Paradise Lost, they call her Meek. They say her last name is Meek.
Officer Meek. Uh Around 8:40 that there was a tall black man in the Bojangles restaurant with a lot of blood and mud. I love that those rhyme.
Hmm.
A lot of blood and mud on him. He was first seen by the employees around 8:15. He had mud up to his knees, much like the police after they found the boys' bodies. Was either bleeding or covered in someone else's blood and mentally disoriented. Podcaster and investigator Bob Ruff wanted to test some of these theories. He wondered if it was possible for someone to make it to the Bojangles from the bayou by 8:15, like based on when the murders are assumed to have occurred, without going onto any main roads. He notes that no witnesses saw a man covered in blood and mud, and the area around the Bojangles was heavily populated. So he wondered if he could have traveled through the bayou banks and the woods. So they had a man attempt the trip from the crime scene to the Bojangles location without leaving the cover of the woods, and it only took 17 minutes. So, not that hard. However, when he came out, he did not have mud on his pants because he had to cross the water to get to the Bojangles, which washed off all the mud and dirt. And how likely do we think it is that you would purposely travel through the cover of the woods, but then just be like, I'll go into this Bojangles?
If you're mentally disoriented. But also, he had water up to his knees.
But mud too.
But so, what if?
Mm-hmm.
What if it had recently rained or something, and
Mm-hmm.
he got the water up to his knees, but it washed the mud off of his
And then as
pants,
he walked
and
away,
because they said his feet were muddy, so then he
mm-hmm.
walked and he tracked mud on his feet, and then he was like, "Well, I can't stay in the woods forever.
And I was gonna say
Let
we're
me
Officer
run
Meek.
into this bathroom."
I was gonna say we're Officer Meek's feet covered in mud, but no, because she went through the drive-through.
Hmm.
So we don't know shit. And that's my section on Mr. Bojangles. So insert thoughts here about Mr. Bojangles.
He did it.
Mm-hmm. Sell me.
Um, I just like,
He's weird.
yeah,
He's up
I
to
think,
something.
what are the fucking
Yeah.
odds? Like it
It
just
feels like one
seems,
of those ones that, like, if I were a cop and that happened, I would never be able to let go of him because I'd be like,
right.
nah, dude, like, that's weird. And there ain't no other, like,
Yeah. I
I
think
can't
that's
look
it. Is
away.
like the fact that it just seems so much more than like coincidental.
Yeah.
And that there were witnesses who said they saw the boys with a tall black man.
Mm-hmm.
That John Douglas said that this was like probably like one person, and the like speculation that this may have been like somebody who had done something like this before, like a serial killer, would lend itself to not being someone they know. um I do also, there are other people I think are guilty of this crime. I don't have one theory,
You're just
but
like, I've
I
not
just
crossed Mr. Bojangles off.
I won't
Okay.
until he doesn't even have a name yet. Like, I need to know who he was.
We need to check his record.
Yeah.
Other suspects from early in the investigation that the police did not continue pursuing were Chris Morgan and Brian Holland. Around May 15th, 1993, the West Memphis police heard from the police in Oceanside, California, and they informed them that they had come in contact with a 19-year-old from West Memphis who knew all three of the victims and was now staying with his sister in Oceanside. He had arrived there a few days after the murders, and his parents actually encouraged him to talk to the police. Chris Morgan cooperated with all testing and questioning, and this included a sexual assault exam where the examiners found that the tip of Chris's penis was quite red. When questioned about this later, he said that it had always been that way, and that this is also what he told the nurses that day. And like, while it's weird, it's like, would it still be red like 10
Several days
later
Right.
when like we also don't even know that they were sexually assaulted at this point? So it's just like,
Right. And now it's clearly irrelevant because we know
Yeah.
they weren't.
Yeah, and it could have been red for other reasons, I guess.
But like, here's the thing. I like, how have we not gone back to this? Somebody like masturbated on them because there was semen found.
Yeah, I just like have never heard that. Like, you said that, but I have never. And I just like, I'm not saying it's not true, but then I
Yeah.
think about like when the police told Damien Echols or told someone they peed in their mouths, and like, I'm
Yeah.
like, where did you get? So it's just like, I'm like, I don't
Maybe
know.
it's
Like,
one
I
of
feel
those
like, is that the
things.
rumor mill?
Yeah. That's the other thing about this case,
I
is
know.
you genuinely don't know.
And that's the problem that we always say about this one, is that like, even if the three teenagers did it, they obviously didn't, but even if they did, like, the police fucked this up so bad
Right.
that like there is nothing that makes any sense. There is no like
Right.
usable evidence anymore. They were losing blood samples. Like, it's just like, I don't know, like, we don't even
Yeah.
know what's true. Half the people around town are saying Chris's arms were cut off. Like, it's just like, I don't
Right.
understand. I don't understand.
You allowed someone to testify in court that they heard a confession about dismemberment, knowing that there was no dismemberment.
They should call Chris Morgan. In the interview, Chris said that he had learned of the homicides from his dad and his friend Bobby, who were saying that Stevie, my bad, not Chris, had been molested and had his arms cut off. Chris Morgan said that he knew Stevie Branch because he played at his friend's that Stevie played at Chris's friend Bobby D'Angelo's house. That was 6 degrees of separation. Chris was an ice cream truck driver in the neighborhood, so he says he had probably sold ice cream to the other two boys, but he didn't really know them. But Chris admits that he and Bobby went to the Hobbs home the day after the murders when they found out the horrific details, or what they thought were the horrific details. They are horrific, not arms cut off. He claims that Bobby asked for and received a photo of Stevie, and then they helped Terry and Pam move their fridge. Okay. You're like,
that's
troubled.
ballsy to go up to the parents of a murdered child and be like, "Can I have a picture of your kid for my own memories?"
Just because
I miss him so much.
Yeah, and like, you're so like, like, I don't know, like, affected by the thought of his arms being cut off, but you're like, yeah, I'll move your fridge.
Yeah.
They probably were just like, we have to do everything to help these grieving parents. And Terry's like, I couldn't give a fuck less that Stevie's gone. Could you just help me move this fridge? Chris had come to California with a few friends, and notably his best friend and roommate, Brian Holland. The police also had a few questions for Brian, and the questions for Brian seem focused on one thing, and that's not the murder. So Weird.
Mm-hmm.
Brian said that he had heard about the homicide from friends, as did everyone else in West Memphis, Arkansas. He told police that he suspected that his friend Chris was gay. Not that he was a murderer, that he was gay. In fact, that he had performed oral sex on another friend of theirs. Chris had previously denied having had any homosexual encounters, but he did later admit to this particular claim. Both were given polygraph tests, and Brian's showed deception, and Chris was told that he completely failed. Showed deception about what, Brian? Is Chris not gay? Help me.
It did say that it showed deception on questions about the murders.
Yeah, I know. That's what they only mean on that, but I'm just like, they don't have anything about Brian Holland that like makes them interested in him as a suspect. He's not even the one who went and got Stevie's picture. That was Bobby. So I'm like,
I think
why?
that they're like trying to use him saying Chris is gay as like a motive for Chris to do this. Like, oh, Chris likes men. He must also like little boys.
The suspects are Chris and Brian, and I'm like, where the fuck? Like, why aren't y'all calling Bobby D'Angelo?
Right.
Brian is just a little snitch who can't keep his friends' secrets. Like, I don't know that you should be looking at him. He just outed his buddy. True. That's all.
True.
In fact, Chris ended up confessing to the crimes. Kind of. Here is some of what he said. He said, well, maybe I freaked out a little and blacked out and killed the 3 boys and effed them up the behind or something. Because I just think that's grotesque, so I'm not going to say that. He asked them, do you have a hypnotist? And then said, maybe I'm Chris and Hyde.
Sir.
Chris Morgan also said that he covered the camera with a tissue and said, if you want me to lie, then I'll lie, and then confessed because he was sick of being there. He testified that he was interviewed for 17 hours over the course of 2 days. Of course, this is pretty similar to the confession of Jessie Miskelly Jr. in that it's not hard to argue that it was coerced or under duress. However, in the trial, the judge did not let the jury hear Chris Morgan's testimony. He made them do it. He made them leave for it because he said, like, you said you were going to lie and then you confessed. Like, we can't even consider this a real confession. Like, you were under duress. You, Mr. Sir? You, Mr. Sir? Same judge?
Yeah.
But Jessie's IQ of a 6-year-old makes no difference for you.
Right.
Okay. All right. How do we feel about Chris Morgan?
I don't think he did it. I think, especially like, I think that they looked into those two for a lot of the same reasons that they looked into the West Memphis 3. Like, they were like drug dealers or like drug users or whatever.
Like bad kids.
But I feel like they got lucky because they got interviewed by Oceanside police and not West Memphis police.
Yeah, so or they just got lucky because West Memphis police like weren't interested in them from the beginning. Like, I think the point like Damien makes is like they were going to get me for something. Like, they were gonna arrest me one way or another.
They put me in a mental hospital until they could arrest me. Yeah.
When Bob Ruff was investigating in 2016, he followed up on a tip from a local named Narlene Hollingsworth, who had said that she saw 4 boys that day, 3 on bikes, and the other on a scooter/skateboard. I think it's a skateboard that they say. That's what I'm going to go with.
I will say, when I watched back Paradise Lost, there were only 2 bikes.
Yeah.
And I had misunderstood. I thought they said the white bike. And they said the bike right here.
Oh.
And I thought they said like the white bike.
So I was actually going to say, I wondered if this could explain your confusion. If there were 4 boys, was there a white bike? But never mind. I take it back. Sorry. She described one of them as heavyset and wearing green shorts, which did not match any of the 3 victims. She remembers because she almost hit this boy with her car and then screamed out the window for him to watch where he was going. There were many Free the West Memphis 3 Facebook groups and forums to discuss details of the case, and one man who was the same age as the boys in 1993, posted that he was with the boys that day. His name was George Taylor, and Pam Hobbs did confirm that he was a friend of Stevie's. Bob Ruff went to speak to him, and he said that he was friends with Stevie, but not the others. Plus, he denied having been with them that day. But when reminded of his Facebook post, he changed his story again, claiming that he was there. In fact, he was wearing green shorts that day and was almost hit by a lady in a car who then got mad at him. Taylor now claimed that he had made it all the way into the woods with the boys. No one was there, and then he went back home alone. Most of his details were not accurate, though. He could not remember where Stevie lived, who he claimed was like his best friend. He also claimed that the pipe bridge that they would cross was a plastic PVC pipe and not metal. Not true.
Seems unlikely.
They did eventually find one, and he was like, look, it's that. And it's like big. Like, it was like a very large one. But the guy was like, Bob Ruff was like, it's not in the right place. It's like, it also like wasn't there in 93. Like, he's just like, looks like what I described. Although George Taylor's story is likely untrue, it is interesting to consider that there could have been a fourth boy.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was considering it because I was thinking about the white bike. So,
sorry.
But still, they think it's possible. So,
yeah.
What if they were just killed by their friend, a fourth boy, another 8-year-old? George Taylor killed them.
That'd be crazy.
Whoa. In 2016, experts re-examined the autopsies and the boys' wounds. And the next year, an article was published explaining that Chris Byers' genital mutilation was more consistent with animal activity than human. Although it had previously been argued that the mutilation must have happened with a clean edge and some precision, this woman felt that it was actually not clean enough of a removal to have been done with a sharp weapon. The expert claimed that the wounds also seemed more consistent with post-mortem injuries. In addition to the mutilation of Chris Byers, it was also believed that the large bloodied patch on the side of Stevie's face was consistent with turtle feeding behaviors. They actually believed that the punctures previously perceived as knife torture, the scrapes thought to be knife wounds, and the wounds inside the boys' mouths could all be consistent with the tooth and claw marks of animals known in that region, which really makes all of this impossible to solve if you can't even differentiate like what's a wound and what isn't.
Right.
Common animals around.
But then I have so many questions about like the causes of death.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because Christopher's cause of death was in no way drowning.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
The other two were, right? Like it was like
it was partially like drowning and like blood loss from injuries.
And like I obviously can't argue that there like wasn't water in his lungs, but I do just like find it strange that any of them like would have died of blood loss when like there doesn't seem to have been a significant amount of blood loss or blood or like I just obviously I don't know. But I mean the same could still be true, right? Like they could still have head trauma, they could have still been beaten. It just means like maybe
but not like all over their bodies.
Right. Like they could have been beaten and then placed in the water and then drowned, or one of them was just beaten so badly that he didn't make it to drowning. People have also theorized like maybe it's not that Chris like was beaten worse, but like maybe he was first and so then he was just sitting outside of the water like dying and the other boys got put in the water faster. Like it's hard, it's just so hard to know. Or like some of this could be wrong, right? Like some of it could be from the humans. It's just like hard to know like if it's all possibly consistent, then it's like, wait, is it all?
But I also think that would account for the lack of blood.
Right.
Because there's no way they drowned indoors and then got brought to a lake or a creek.
Yeah. Common animals around this area included snapping turtles, red-eared sliders, turtles which we are familiar with, raccoons, coyotes, and cats. Obviously, snapping turtles would be known to snap, but even small turtles like the red-eared sliders will attack things in the water and cause at least some serious scratches. Tests were performed in a
Very long
similar
nails.
yeah. Tests were performed in a similar environment with a pig carcass, and then in the exact bayou with chicken carcasses. And the turtles in both tests began biting and attacking the bodies almost immediately, ripping the softest parts off first, which would have been Chris Byers' genitals. Not his specifically, I don't.
But yeah, something that doesn't have like bone.
Mm-hmm. And that's like protruding from the rest of it. When the pig carcass was pulled out of the water, they say, I didn't see it, but they say that the wounds look similar to those on the boys. I'm assuming not like entirely, but just like the scratches probably like similar.
Yeah.
And they had a lot where they showed like this looks like a gripping while this looks like a scratching. Like an animal would like grab while they attack or pull meat off or whatever. And I think like when you had said last when you did the murders, like they weren't in there that long, and I would have been like, yeah, they would need to be in there longer, but apparently these turtles are just like maniacs.
Right.
Wild.
Which is weird because I feel like we could never get our turtle to eat.
Yeah, maybe the red-eared sliders are a little slower. They also thought that these being post-mortem animal predation injuries could explain the shortage of blood compared to the wounds that we're seeing. So like I'm thinking of like Diet Love Pass. Like we're seeing like gaping head wounds out of Stevie, missing body parts, and we're like, not only like is there not blood present, so I guess you could say people cleaned. I just have such a hard time believing that like they cleaned up leaves and like to wash it.
Well, and like that's why they kept saying like inside.
Yeah, other people said they could have like splashed water from the bayou just up the banks and like rinsed it, but like maybe I guess which could also still account for like a small amount of blood that like and I said that like they did luminol testing and they did find like some. So if there is like beating blood, beating amounts of blood, they could have splashed water up, whatever. And then the rest could have been animal. It's just so hard to know like what was and what wasn't. So I know you were wary of the turtle theory. What are your thoughts now?
Wary of the turtle theory.
Yeah.
I honestly had not heard that before, I think.
Yeah.
Like I've just always been like, oh, like these boys were like mutilated.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me to go from like this was like very clearly like so clean, and like even in the trial saying like that this he wasn't castrated, he was skinned. And
yeah, and like to a point where like a doctor couldn't even do it.
Right.
And then now we have an
like,
expert saying
a turtle bit it off.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's just interesting to me like how differing those opinions could be. But I think that I think that makes so much more sense with like the blood loss, because like they were saying like, oh, there's no blood, so it must have happened somewhere else and they brought them here. But then like,
how did they drown?
Right. How did they drown? If they had these horrible wounds like all over the place, how was there not, even if they were still alive when brought there and then drowned, where is the blood? So I do think that makes more sense.
Yeah, I'm pretty sold on the turtle theory. There's something later that I was sold on too, and then it wrecks with my turtle theory.
And like in my brain I was like, oh, so like maybe this was like all like an accidental death, and then I was like, no. They were stripped and their clothes were stuck to the ground. And
I think that too. Every time I'm like, wait, every wound is caused by the turtles. They just fell in the bayou and drowned. And then I'm like, nope, didn't tie their hands and feet together. Like, but yeah, I mean, it makes it very like, if there wasn't water in their lungs, it could make it very conducive to, like, this is literally just a dump site.
Right.
But there is. So,
Right.
sorry. So, one question that has kind of been present throughout the entire case is whether the murderer would have only mutilated one of the boys if this was, in fact, a satanic ritual. Typically, when things are ritualistic, they are pretty uniform, especially if, like, this number 3 is really important. Like, you would think you have to do the same thing to all 3 of them. But if the extensive wounds on the boys' bodies, though, are being largely disputed by these post-mortem claims, then what would that mean? It would seem more likely then that the boys were just killed by someone who wanted them dead and then tried to conceal their bodies, not like they were a sacrifice.
Right.
You know, maybe.
Surprise!
That's just my thought. We discussed before that it is unclear, but sexual assault seems to be fairly disputed. So then what would be the motive? FBI profiler John Douglas believes that these murders are obviously personal cause homicides. If true, Mr. Bojangles would be less likely, as he didn't seem to know the boys. And
we don't know. We don't know who he is.
True. And the amount of blood found on him would actually become inconsistent with the injuries.
That's true.
If they're actually just turtle attacks.
But
he really wouldn't have had that much blood.
Right.
That's why there's no because it all landed on him.
Yeah. I was going to say, they did say that, like, some of the boys had, like, defensive wounds on their hands, which so I'm guessing
he really
also
was bleeding.
Attributed to turtles, but yeah, maybe it was his blood.
Yeah. True.
I will not let him go.
I know, and they have said that, like, the inside of the mouth, like, everyone has been, like, pretty clear that, like, that is probably, like, the boys biting their own insides of their mouths while things are happening to them. And then now they say, like, it could be turtles, and, like, it could be, I guess, but I also think, like, I think it's, like, perfectly plausible and doesn't really change the case either way. Obviously, like, it's sad to think about them, like, biting their own mouths, but I also think it's, like, very, like, normal, you know?
Right. If you're being hurt.
So, considering that from Mr. Douglas, we're going to talk about some of the people closest to the boys.
Who killed them?
Michael Moore's father, Todd Moore, was out of town at the time of the murders. Check. Chris Byers' dad, although so was Jessie Miscavige. So, Chris Byers' dad, Mark, was confirmed by witnesses to have been out with his wife and other son looking for the boys. Only seems to account for the afterward time to me. They're like, that's his alibi. And I'm like,
nope.
Okay.
I mean, his alibi would have been that he was at court.
Yeah.
Why are we not using that?
Interesting. Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, has no consistent alibi for the afternoon and evening of May 5th. But we're saving him. Aaron Hutchison, who had testified as a child in 1993 that he witnessed the murders by Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Miscavige Jr., claimed, along with his mother, Vicky, that they were essentially given their story by police. 10 years after the murders, when Aaron was 19, he said publicly that he believed Mark Byers was responsible. His opinion now, though, is unknown. Some consider the fact that Chris seemed to be the target of the most violence as a sign pointing to Mark Byers as the killer. However, now that it's debated whether or not Chris's genitals were removed by the murderer or post-mortem, I don't know now.
Right. But he is the only one that didn't drown.
Yep. So he still could have been hurt, like, beaten the most.
He was beat to death.
And, the most injured, yeah. This did, though, cause people to wonder if Mark was abusing Chris. Perhaps things went too far, and then the other boys were witnesses. Many people testified that Mark was mad at Chris that afternoon because he had already told him twice to come home, and he still hadn't. In fact, later on, after hearing the evidence of past injuries found on Chris's body that were consistent with a belt buckle imprint, Byers admitted to having spanked Chris shortly before his disappearance with his belt. There's a lot of things that Mark Byers admits to after he has no choice.
Mhm.
Just saying. There was also the fact that he had given a used knife to the documentary crew shortly after the murders that contained human blood in a corner that would have been difficult to clean if you were trying to clean it, and that the blood was not inconsistent with Chris Byers. So that's just that little fact
Or
there.
Mark Byers.
True. But Mark wasn't murdered, so that's not the part
Yeah,
we're
but I
focusing
mean,
on.
in the havoc of murdering someone.
You could, yeah, hurt yourself. Other people had made claims of abuse at the hands of Mark Byers. Ryan Clark, Chris's brother, said that he would get angry when he saw Mark on TV talking about how much he loved Chris because he knew that Mark hated Chris and actually had nothing to do with him. He reports abuse to both of them, but says that it was always worse for Chris. He remembers one time that Mark made Chris stand in the kitchen with his pants pulled down for hours. I never understand. Good for me, I guess, but and I love when we say that, but I never understand those types of abuse
The
that are just,
humiliation.
yeah, but it's no one's even watching that, just for you to watch him, and then
Yeah.
it's and it always tends to be positions that are physically uncomfortable to hold for a long time, so it's just
Yeah.
the torture of standing still and then with
Yeah.
your pants down for an why?
There's a serial killer, and I can't remember who it is. There's a serial killer who talked about he had an abusive childhood, and he said that there was one time he had a lot of trouble wetting the bed, and there was one time that his parents made him stand in the yard with his his peed on bed sheets for the whole day, just holding them.
And then remember one of the Menendez brothers, Eric or Lyle, said
Yes.
they had to just stay.
That one I kind of not I understand it, but
sure.
That one, their dad was already sexually abusing them.
Yes, yeah, it wasn't. But I will say, probably most likely someone who's making their kid do this, this is not the only abuse that they're suffering from them. But
Chris was the only one that had bruising on and around his anal orifice.
Yep. After the murders, neighbors had filed a restraining order against him based on claims that he had sent their kid home severely bruised up. Mark says the kid was misbehaving and all he did was hit their kid with a fly swatter.
And bruised him?
Well, I think Mark maybe disputes the bruises. Until I see the bruises, then I will admit that I hit him. But for now...
That rod and that staff was a fly
swatter. In 1994, in Hardy, Arkansas, Mark was in the car with a teenage boy when another... Why? I don't know.
Okay, Edgeen.
When another boy started talking trash.
You're 45. You shouldn't be involved in it.
Oh, was he involved? He convinced his passenger that he should go fight the other boy, and even provided him with a pocket knife to use. He stood watch at his car holding a rifle to ensure that the fight would happen. He was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor and sentenced to 1 year in prison, which he did not serve. The other kid was hospitalized from his injuries, and Mark was ordered to pay half of his hospital bills, which was a steep $2,000 for Mark Byers. He's bankrupt, friends. Also, though, it does make you think, would he have done that with the young boys? Would he have been fight? Yeah. And then something happened. That is nuts.
Oh, that's scary.
To do it a year after?
Yeah.
Within the same month, Melissa and Mark had burglarized a neighbor's home, and then it burned down from an unknown cause. It's actually said that by the end of that year, the two of them faced 12 misdemeanor charges. 2 years later, on March 29th, 1996, Melissa Byers was found unconscious in their home and was pronounced dead an hour later. Mark found her unconscious and called his neighbor, asking him to come check if she was breathing. Confused, the neighbor encouraged him to call an ambulance, but Mark insisted that he come check first. The neighbor went over and then called the police, after finding that Melissa was not breathing. Mark says that he was immediately sure that it was an overdose, but he was nervous to call because he thought they would accuse him of smothering his wife. What?
Inside thought.
I wasn't thinking that, Mark. Marky Mark.
Now
Thank you. Investigators found needle marks on various parts of her body, and despite Melissa being a known heroin addict, they did investigate this as a homicide initially. The cause of death was later found to be undetermined. Interesting, when the police arrived, they found Mark waiting there with his girlfriend, Mandy Beasley. This seems to me contradictory to the depiction in Paradise Lost 2 of Mark talking to Melissa at her grave about her being his best friend, missing her tremendously, and thinking of the evil animals that he blames for her death. He said, "I love her more than any man in the world has ever loved his wife." So much that he had a girlfriend while they were still married and might have killed her.
In the original Paradise Lost, they ask, after Mark testifies, they ask Melissa, like, what do you think about, like, them implying that your husband might have something to do with this? And she just, like, yanks him out of the camera, and she was like, we're leaving. I was like,
girl,
that's not a good look.
No. In the second Paradise Lost documentary, Mark Byers requests to be given a polygraph test and allowed the documentary crew to film it. They noted medications that Byers was actively on in case they may have any bearing on results. So I will list those because they're of interest. He was on Xanax, which I do believe was which may have been prescribed, maybe. I will note though that it is known that criminals take Xanax when they're about to be questioned. I don't know if it works on polygraph tests, but it certainly calms them to not seem suspicious. So, okay, work. He took Zoloft, which is an SSRI, anxiety and depression medication. Sinequin, which is for anxiety and depression, but specifically is associated with bipolar. He took Haldol, which is an antipsychotic for psychosis and schizophrenia. And he took Depakote for seizures. I obviously had questions about the antipsychotic. And it does sound like he has had hallucinations before, according to him.
I also wonder, like, how much does having a brain tumor affect your brain function?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know medically, like, if they would give Haldol, if, like, you're because you do, right? Like, people hallucinate with brain tumors. I don't know if they would give Haldol, though, like, if they know what the medical reason is.
And but I wonder if this is, like, after.
Yes.
Because the second one's, like, 2001.
Yeah, but I will say, like, I'll get to this, but, like, there's, to me, like, a lot of evidence that he has been ill his whole life. But I question the brain tumor at all. So that's just me.
I honestly,
he's like, wait, you're mad at me? You're like mad at me because I didn't remember cutting myself, but I have a brain tumor.
His forehead did look so swollen though.
Oh, there.
Like when he was testifying.
Yeah. In the pre-interview, I gotta set up for this. In the pre-interview, before being hooked up to anything, the tester is asking background questions, including about the death of his wife and Chris's mother, Melissa. He states that the cause of her death is undetermined, but says that he believes she had given up her will to live and that she suffers from addiction, and this is how she died. Okay. The interviewer asked, "Have you had any problems with the police?" To which he replied, "Not major." The guy looked at him. He said, "A couple speeding tickets, a DWI after my wife was murdered." After your...
After your who was what?
Your wife was murdered? I immediately start Googling and I'm like, clips of John Mark Byers saying his wife was murdered. No one is commenting on this. Like, no Reddit threads. I'm not finding YouTube videos where people are like, look what he just said. And I'm like, what is happening? What is
But
happening?
it was like in the documentary?
Yes! Yes! I was like, I am so confused.
I want to watch the other two. But I just needed to get through the trials first. But
I will also remind you, just because of his answer, of Mark Byers' criminal history, which spans from the 1970s, when he threatened his parents and the responding officer with a butcher knife, to 1999, when he accidentally sold Xanax to an undercover officer. Incredible. He literally called him. He thought it was his friend. He called this man. Come get some drugs. He said, okay, I'll be there. He had many arrests in between, including writing bad checks, burglary, suspected arson, so not an arrest, but just suspected, and that DWI that he admitted to. For
forcing teenagers at gunpoint to fight.
Yeah, contributing to child delinquency. For selling drugs to an officer, he served 15 months in prison, where he did become a part of a white supremacist group. Good for Mark making friends.
I'm shocked. I cannot believe.
It was the brain tumor. Damien Echols stated around this time, that's what I was going to say, is that, like, the whole, like, in the 70s, like, he would have been pretty young, like, threatening his parents with a butcher knife, to me, could be, like, onset of schizophrenia, psychotic illness. Yeah. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know, like, how long has he been taking Haldol, but he's not well, Marky. Damien Echols stated around this time that he believed Mark Byers was the killer and that Melissa likely knew about it, was involved, but knew about it after the fact, and that he believes that is why she was killed. He said, I don't have anything to say to Mark Byers. He's beneath me. He doesn't even deserve my contempt. But there was certainly no love lost on Mark's end. He followed up on his threats in the first documentary that he would desecrate the graves of the 3 teens when they die. But by the time the second was being filmed, they were not dead, and he could not wait any longer. He created graves for them at the crime scene and then set fire to them in the woods. He poured gasoline or lighter fluid all over dry leaves and grass.
Good idea.
And watched the fire spread. I wrote, what a good idea.
I'm sorry.
Buddy. No. Arkansas got no
crazy
like,
ass dude. What a crazy man.
A character. People also found it suspicious that Mark Byers had his teeth removed in 1997, and they were unable to test his teeth imprints. Not that they would have anyway. Like, I'm like, they weren't looking at Mark Byers. They were going to test his teeth. He had conflicting stories to tell about what happened to his teeth. First, he said his seizure medication caused them to start falling out. But later, he said that he had them removed because of periodontal disease. When the documentary crew said, which was last week, you said, he was like, I don't know.
He also said, like, with the periodontal disease, that he was supposed to have gotten them removed, like, a very long time ago, like, before his son was murdered, and he just couldn't afford it yet. But he was like, this has been on the docket.
Okay, I personally find myself believing that Mark Byers has a serious mental illness and likely years of significant substance use that make him the character that he is. Mm-hmm. The knife information is suspicious, and I absolutely think he murdered Melissa Byers. However, the ability to question him is now gone, as he died in a car accident in 2020. I'm not sold on Mark Byers, but thoughts?
I just, like,
his mental illness doesn't make him not guilty. I mean, it could certainly.
Yeah. In the years, like, since, like, leading up to his death, when he, like, lived in Millington, like every picture of him in that time period, he is wearing a t-shirt that says like "Free the West Memphis 3."
Mm-hmm.
And like there's like I sent you a picture of the uh album of like him and like Jessie Miss Kelly Sr. and like
Mm-hmm.
that he was like writing so hard for them.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm like, that's like so weird if you
Mm-hmm.
did it, like,
Mm-hmm.
but
And I think that to me is like such a signifier of mental illness, that like
yeah,
he's so quickly sucked into like a delusion. I mean, based in
yeah,
reality, but like he starts to believe it, and he like cannot, like, it has to be them, and he like, with all of his gumption, it was them, and then it
no,
wasn't. And
yeah,
like he goes completely down another train that we'll get to. But
yeah,
yeah, like, it's he's impressionable,
right.
you know?
And I think that that's interesting
You
because
would
like,
you would keep accusing them if it was you, right?
yeah, and like Pam Hobbs, like I said, also like eventually was like, I don't think the West Memphis 3 did
Mm-hmm.
it, because she thinks someone else did it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then like Michael Moore's parents both are like, they still think that that's who did it,
Mm-hmm. That
so like,
sucks.
I know. um but yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know about right now, but like at the time that they were released, they definitely still thought that they had done it,
Yeah.
and everyone else had not thought that anymore.
Yeah. Another parental figure has remained on people's radars over the years, and that is Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather. His relationship with Pam had been rocky, pretty on and off over the years they were together. In fact, shortly after Stevie's death, he moved away and was never questioned. Pam obviously wishes that Terry had informed her sooner that night that he still hadn't found Stevie. So, like, she has some complaints about how it was handled, but she doesn't say for certain that, like, she believes he was involved. But her family has always blamed him. Many people find it strange that he would have the police meet them at Catfish Island and not their home, considering Stevie may still have come home that night and, like, no one would have been there waiting. So they're
Hmm.
like, you could, if you didn't have a phone or whatever, you could have called from Catfish Island and then said, now I'm going home, like, meet me
Yeah.
there. Uh, but like, he had no interest in like waiting up for Stevie.
Hmm.
As far as fitting a profile goes, Terry is obviously closely connected to the boys, has a history of violence, and he was a butcher in a slaughterhouse. Isn't
So
that?
a little more damning than a jeweler.
Uh-huh. We discussed before that Terry's order of events for May 5th is a bit confusing. He says that he never saw Stevie or the boys that afternoon or evening at all. He says immediately after dropping Pam at work, he began looking for Stevie and adds that he was never alone that night and has witnesses to corroborate this. David Jacoby, his friend, said that he did help look for Stevie for a few minutes, but that mostly Terry had left Amanda at David's house for a few different periods of time between 6 and 8:30. So a damning time frame. Although eyewitness testimony is flawed and this could be inaccurate, another witness from the neighborhood came forward 16 years later and said that the boys were playing in her backyard until at least 6:30 that night. She knows this because she left at 6:30 to go to her Wednesday church service, right? So she's got
Hmm.
some deets. It was a Wednesday, and she knows what time she goes to church. And when she walked out at 6:30, she heard Terry calling for them to come inside. She said that for a year she did not know that Terry was claiming he didn't see them all afternoon, but if that is actually what he is saying, then he is lying. She would like us to know.
Thank you.
Much like Mark Byers, Terry Hobbs had been accused of abuse before the murders and would be after. Stevie's aunts said that they had witnessed abuse from Terry to Stevie, sometimes leaving welts on him. One of them also claimed that he had molested his daughter Amanda, which Amanda says is true. So I think we're going to say it's true, right?
Yeah.
The way everything was like worded was like, Amanda alleges this also. And I'm like, Okay.
Amanda corroborates.
Yeah.
Amanda confirms.
Yeah. A few weeks before the murders, Terry had hit Pam because he said she was kissing a Mexican man in his home. Not allowed.
I mean, within the confines of a monogamous marriage.
But not quite. But in 1994, Pam alleges that Terry beat her up. When her brother and father found out, they went over where Terry shot her brother. He survived, but years later died of complications in a surgery related to the gunshot wound. Murder is what they call that. Delayed murder. I believe this particular
manslaughter.
I believe that this particular incident is one that he states she was asking for because she wouldn't stop bugging him about one woman that he cheated on her with. She was bugging me for 3 days about one woman. What did you want me to do? So, monogamous, loose. One of the aunts says she went to the Hobbs home on May 6th when she noticed Terry was washing linens, curtains, and clothes. This caught her attention because she said Terry was very vocal about his role as a man and that he never did laundry. The family also found Stevie's pocket knife among Terry's belongings, which startled Pam because this was something that Stevie always had on him. Terry later claimed that he took it because Stevie was misusing it, but Pam did not understand why she had not been notified of any incidents of her son misusing a pocket knife. I don't know that I believe Terry is like a stand-up stepdad that would have told her, but I mean, fair that she should have been told. The hair found in the knot of the shoelaces used to bind the boys did not match any of the 3 teens, so a detective in 2006 collected a secret DNA sample from Terry Hobbs to test against it. They found that the hair was not inconsistent with Terry Hobbs, and that another hair on one of the boys' bodies was consistent with David Jacoby. Statistically, the hair consistent with Terry would have also been consistent with 29 other people in West Memphis. So just putting that out there. Fair. 29 other people want Stevie dead? I don't know. But it's argued that this hair doesn't mean much, even if it is Terry's, because he would have every reason to be in close contact with Stevie, and the hair could have stuck to something. But it is interesting that the hair is tied inside of the knot, and that it was not on the ligature on his own stepson, but on a different boy. I think that's weird. The police first interviewed Terry Hobbs in 2007, but not very seriously. They were just some bros talking. But after he sued one of the Dixie Chicks, also known as the Chicks now, for defamation in 2009, he had to be deposed, which opened him up to lots of questions. I'm thinking he did not think this one through. They said, oh, we get to ask you literally anything we want now. Good job. This is where he tells us that he doesn't feel bad for hitting Pam over one simple woman. They asked him questions about May 5th as well, trying to clarify certain details. When asked if he or Pam called the police when he walked into Catfish Island, he replied, I don't care. Okay. I would like weep. I'd be like, okay. So like, do you want to drop this defamation suit? Like, if you don't care, why are we here? By 2012, Mark Byers and Damien Echols no longer suspected one another. Byers stated publicly that Terry Hobbs is now his number 1 suspect, and he had even helped police by recording a phone call with Terry. I listened to it. There was nothing of use, so it's not here. Other than like
that's so Mark Byers coded to think that he had evidence on that phone call.
But it's like all over YouTube, so I kept listening to it. But I mean, there were things that people were like, "Oh, that's so suspicious." Like, do you hear the way he like laughed? But it's like all stuff that just like Terry Hobbs is like creepy and like could be a murderer, but it's not like anything damning.
Yeah.
Pam Hobbs now also agrees that Terry probably murdered her son.
Yeah.
She doesn't say for sure, and she says she doesn't like to think about that, but it does seem probable. The following year, 2013, people came forward saying that they knew what happened, and it did involve Terry Hobbs. In an affidavit signed by Billy Stewart and Benny Guy, cute name, they shared the story that they had heard. They said that on May 5th, two teenage boys from the Lakeshore Trailer Park came. Billy Stewart said that on May 5th, two teenage boys from the Lakeshore Trailer Park came to his house to buy weed, and in the truck, he noticed Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby
Isn't
kissing.
that where Damien Echols lived?
Yep, it is.
I'm so sorry for interrupting you at that moment.
He noticed the two teenage boys are not Jason and Damien. Let me clear that up. They will get named later, but yes, that is where they live.
I'm currently listening to his book, and I was like, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah. In the truck, he noticed Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby kissing. Billy sold weed, coke, and meth to Terry, and thus hung out with him often. And he said he knew that Terry was bisexual, with a propensity for young boys. He says that after seeing him that day, Terry didn't buy from him for a long time. And when he finally reached out again, he asked Billy Stewart to deliver to his house, which he thought was weird because that had never been their agreement before. When he arrived, he saw Terry and David kissing again. And then again when he delivered to Terry in Memphis at a gay bar.
Which one?
I don't remember. It had the name, I just didn't know it. Terry told their mutual friend that the boys had caught him in the woods that night doing something with David and the two teenage boys that they shouldn't have seen, and that he didn't want Pam to know. One of those teenage boys, Buddy Lucas, told Billy Stewart that he and his friend L.G. Hollingsworth, LG, were picked up by Terry and David. They drove down a dirt road by the Blue Beacon truck wash and went down into the woods. They made Buddy and LG wrestle before doing something that Buddy was embarrassed to admit. They all noticed three boys on bicycles spying on them, and then David and Terry ran off to catch them. He said Buddy said that him and LG were forced to take the boys' clothes off while Terry beat the boys and even bit and cut one of their genitals. The two teenage boys were then forced to hold the young boys, while the men killed them. They tied up and placed the boys in the water before tossing their bikes. Terry and David took them back to Lakeshore Trailer Park. Billy Stewart says after hearing this story, he tried to call police, but they discouraged him from pushing the issue since he is a known drug dealer. Thoughts?
So, what if someone did mutilate Chris Byers' genitals, and then turtles also chewed around the area?
Because it would have been more exposed.
Right.
It would have maybe been like softer. It would have had blood, possibly.
Right.
Yeah, I struggled with that because I was like, no, I'm so convinced it's the turtles. But I think a few options. So, like, we know, I think this was told to him, like, later in May, this Billy guy is saying this, like, a few weeks later. But we know that, like, within days, the results of their autopsies are public. Thank you, Mark Byers. So, like, also, it's possible that, like, not that this story's completely fake, because I don't know about that, but that, like, they're like, well, and then I know something happened to their genitals, so, like, maybe they are adding that, even though it's, like, not true. Yeah. But I do think that, yeah, like, they said bit and cut, like, that doesn't mean he cut it off. It doesn't mean, like, it could have been, like, injuries. I find it weird that Terry Hobbs would do that to Chris
Right.
But I think the way they explained it was like they just like grabbed them, and like
Yeah.
maybe Chris was the one trying to get away the most. Like it feels very
Yeah.
like situational. Maybe Chris was smart mouthing, like who knows? And it feels weird that I am like so sold on this story when like it's really just testimony, but it's like it's in a signed affidavit, which like gives it like a little credence for me. He says like I tried to tell the police, but they discouraged me. And if you actually read it, like I obviously summarized it, but if you read it, like it is like incredibly detailed.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and like nothing's wrong with it.
Right. No,
Nothing.
I think this is exactly what happened. And like I think
David
I don't
Jacoby was
know,
his boyfriend the whole freaking time.
not like to
And David Jacoby claimed they weren't even that close, which I think makes sense if he was involved.
yeah. I hearing them say like he had a penchant for young boys also makes me wonder if
Mm-hmm.
there was like a sexual aspect with Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't like maybe he like had his eye on Chris or something in general
Maybe,
and
or again, like, not that he's smart enough to be like, well, I can't do it to Stevie because they'll know it's me, but like, sure. Or it could have been like a punishment thing. Like, if Chris was the one causing him the most
right.
trouble, and so he did this, he could have also caused bruising
Mhm.
on Chris. I do
Mhm.
also still think it's possible that there's bruising on Chris from sexual assault from Mark Byers
Yeah.
before that. There
And that
aren't
my
really,
buyers didn't kill him.
yeah, right, but
Both
just
could be
before
true.
that.
Yeah.
But there aren't really claims of Mark Byers committing sexual abuse. Not that it
Yeah.
couldn't be, but just like there aren't
Yeah.
that we know of. But yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
You like when I was reading it to Billy, like I was like, he's gonna think this sounds like so ridiculous because it's like out of nowhere, you're like, and he's gay and he killed him, and you're like, what? But immediately I said it and he was like, oh, that's what happened. And it's
Yeah.
like, why does it make so much sense? So that's the end of the theories. We were pretty sold.
Mhm.
It's a mixture between Terry and David and the turtles.
Mhm.
Okay, I think so. And lastly, as of last month, it's barely May, the Arkansas Supreme Court decided that they will allow further DNA testing on the evidence, which Damien has been fighting for since 2021. Once again, it was a disagreement on the same Arkansas Act 1780, the DNA statute that they had argued about 10 years prior. This time, the court said that the statute does not allow for relief for a person no longer in state custody. But the state Supreme Court disagreed. So
Good.
that is where
Like
we
here's the thing,
end.
we should be trying to solve this anyway.
Mm-hmm. So, any final parting thoughts for our
Mm,
four-parter? We've solved the crime.
yeah. You're welcome.
They have this affidavit. Do they just need to find Harry Hobbs now?
I mean, I think that's definitely part of the problem.
Oh,
Um,
can't find him now.
yeah. What a bummer.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
highly recommend Damien's book, Life After
oh my
Death.
god, it's so good. If you have Spotify Premium,
Mm-hmm.
you can listen to it
I recommend
there.
listening. If you're a reader, then read, but listening to him tell it
He
is
reads it, yeah.
great.
Yeah. He's so impressive. Um, I'm like low-key obsessed
Mm-hmm. He's so
with
sweet.
him.
Yeah. I was looking at his Instagram and just his like
All the
long
karate.
captions about his karate. Yeah. And it was as recent as April, so.
Yeah. He posted a story yesterday.
Oh, cute.
But sad thing, I did notice him and Jason do not follow each other on Instagram.
Yeah, so I had heard that they weren't friends anymore. Um, but I heard that it was from the making of The Devil's Knot,
Mhm.
which was in like 2013, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Like it was like a while ago. But I think Damien was like not about it. and Jason is like actually like involved in it, like was like involved in making it. I must say, like, I don't know if Damien just was like worried, but like I feel like the devil's not is like very accurate. And like I don't think it's like a poor representation of them at all.
Yeah, I agree.
But obviously like maybe they just had some arguments like leading up to that, but I also like find it hard like that's what it still is. So
Right.
like I don't know, maybe there's been other stuff that they just like disagree with each other on, but it's very sad.
Yeah. I kind of want to watch that again.
It's so good.
hmm
Oh, my tummy's rumbling. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging with us for 4 parts.
Yes.
We are obsessed with this case.
Yeah.
And
It's hard not to be
I
where we're
know.
from.
Yeah, and like just it's so like obviously wrong, but then like still unsolved. So it's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there were certain times where I was researching and I was like, what if like we're wrong about all of this and like they did do it? And then but I'm like, no, it's like literally impossible.
Even if they and if they did, they didn't prove it.
Right.
So all right, friends. Bye.